Hello and welcome back to the Black Doctors Podcast. Today, I'm privileged to be speaking with Dr. Brittne Halford. She's a MD and MPH. She attended the University of Michigan for undergrad, completed medical school at the Feinberg School of Medicine. It's Northwestern. She completed an internal medicine residency program and practiced as a hospitalist at Emory before moving on to work in Boston. Dr. Halford is an entrepreneur, wife, mother, and a financial guru. So, Dr. Halford, thank you so much for joining me on the program.
Dr. Bradley, thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. You can call me Steven. Is it okay if I call you Brittne?
Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. So tell me a little bit about your current practice and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I am an internal medicine physician practicing as a hospitalist. So what that means is I take care of patients when they come into the hospital when they're acutely ill. And typically my schedule is a 7 days on, 7 days off. There is some fluctuation to that schedule. And, it provides me an opportunity to really engage in many different levels. I work with consultants. So if the patient comes in and they're having an acute heart attack, then I'll contact the cardiologist. Or if they have some type of small bowel obstruction, but they're admitted to medicine, then I'll consult a surgeon. So, I do a breadth of things, but really just focusing in on that acute illness and taking care of patients when they're in the hospital.
What's the favorite thing that you love about your job?
I think my favorite thing is the patient care. What I loved about internal medicine was the rapport that you can form with patients. But as I transitioned from residency to my attending position, we moved a couple of times. So we moved from Atlanta to Boston. And I really didn't think that I would have an opportunity to have an outpatient cohort. But as a hospitalist, oftentimes patients are there for 7 days and people come to the same hospital. So I see, just a week ago, I saw a guy who I took care of in May. And so I still had that rapport and that continuity. And I think that's what I love most.
And when did you decide to become a hospitalist?
It was in probably my third year in residency because I liked a little bit of everything, but I really couldn't pinpoint just one specific thing that I really wanted to delve into a little bit more. In addition, I actually did like critical care, but I just didn't think that would work for my lifestyle. So I did not pursue a critical care fellowship.
And when exactly did you decide to become a physician?
Well, if you were to ask my mom, she would say when I was like 3. But we actually have documentation. So my dad is an academic, and I have 3 other cousins who are around the same age. So we would always do like a cousin swap. And when my dad had us, he would make us do work. So he had us write down what we wanted to be when we grew up. And he saved them from when we were 7 years old. And so he pulled them.
Was he the favorite? Was he the favorite uncle for that, or no?
Of course not. He corrected your grammar. You didn't have any snacks when you came to Uncle Tony's. It was like all fruits and vegetables. But that was my dad, so you gotta love him. But he had us write down what we wanted to be when we grew up, and we were 7. And I wrote down that I wanted to be a doctor. So it's documented, and we have proof that I wanted to be a doctor when I was 7 years old.
At 7, you made this huge life decision. You completed high school. You went to University of Michigan. What was your experiences there, and how did that help you in that path to medical school?
So going to the University of Michigan was great. I had a full tuition scholarship, so that helped to save money on student debt. I just had to pay for room and board. And then during my second year of undergrad, I became an RA, a resident assistant. And so that paid for my room and board. It was a phenomenal experience. Well, one, you've talked about this before, like imposter syndrome. So I'm from Flint, Michigan. So I remember I went to this party, and it was not necessarily a Black party, but there were some, Black people there who knew of Flint, Michigan. And so I was discussing where I was from with this one guy, and he said, "Oh man, I'm glad you made it out. Have you ever seen anyone get murdered?" And I'm like,
Jeez.
No. So you got some of that. I remember almost failing an exam. But other than just the usual things that you get in your first year, second year of college, Michigan afforded me many opportunities. I traveled abroad. I went to Ghana, and I did some research on sickle cell, as well as going to Chile, and I got an opportunity to perfect my Spanish, and those were all paid for in undergrad. So I love my Michigan education. I
Uh,
bleed blue always.
Hablas español.
Sí, un poquito.
Sí, hablo más o menos. We know you travel because you pronounced Chile the right way.
Right.
So from undergrad to medical school, how was the application process for you?
Well, I had to take the MCAT twice. I really struggled with standardized testing. But other than that, I think the application process went, I guess, as smoothly as it could have. I had, again, some imposter syndrome, so I probably did not apply to all the schools that potentially would have accepted me. I remember my Northwestern interview, and being from Flint, Michigan was a hot topic even before the Flint water crisis. So I spoke I spoke a lot about where I grew up, but overall, I think it was a pleasant experience. There were some challenges, when I took the MCAT twice. I think that was the biggest challenge, and that I really didn't have anyone to like navigate me through that process. Our counselors at Michigan were really good, and I had a few friends who had matriculated through medical school who were helpful. But I think that was a big challenge as well.
And then how was your time at Northwestern in Chicago?
So I love Chicago. Kevin and I actually met in Chicago at the House of Blues.
Okay.
And Kevin is my husband for the listeners who don't know. So Chicago was great. Northwestern was great. I think when I interviewed there, one of the things that struck me is I wanted to be a physician who served the underserved, because just being a minority in medicine and being from Flint, Michigan, the healthcare disparities touched my family. I mean, more
Hmm.
times than not. My aunt Val was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and she died.
Wow.
From what could have been treated pretty easily, but there was a delay in diagnosis. My grandmother, she had a stroke, undergoing a carotid endarterectomy, and
Oh man.
it happens, right? But I think if she had not gotten that done in Flint, Michigan, and had been at an academic center, then that wouldn't have happened. And so that led to her death. So I just seen, just health care disparities touch my family personally. And so I wanted to be a physician who served the underserved. And when I interviewed at Northwestern, I didn't really see how I would get that opportunity being at such a prestigious hospital, living in Streeterville. But thankfully, I was able to do rotations at Stroger Hospital, which is the public hospital. I don't even know if it's still called Stroger, in Chicago, which afforded me that opportunity, as well as volunteering in some of the free clinics. And that also afforded me opportunities to learn kind of underserved care.
Yeah, I think and what you said was so important because when people talk about healthcare disparities, it can be something as simple as not having access to the same quality healthcare. I mean, that's usually what it is, but not all hospitals and hospital systems are the same. So when lower income areas or underserved areas can't afford to bring highly skilled practitioners, then that quality of care is not what it should be.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right, Stephen. We see it now. I mean, we're seeing it play out now in this COVID pandemic. And so I've been encouraging my family, like, please stay home.
As a female physician, what challenges or obstacles have you overcome during your time in training or your time in practice that other male colleagues may not have dealt with?
I think one is just being heard. We know that there have been studies that have shown, when there's someone who's introducing a female speaker, they will call them by their first name instead of saying Dr. So-and-so, and they will use that as the title to introduce a speaker if they were a male. Oftentimes, I think, our contribution is not valued as heavily. And so I've had that happen to me where I say something and it just kind of gets ignored. And then maybe my male colleague or someone else has said, and then they're like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Other things just with physical appearance, having to be concerned about what your hair looks like as a Black woman physician. I've had people like touch my hair or say that hair is not unprofessional or, so I think just some of those challenges, you're always perceived as the nurse when you walk into the room. And even when you call a family, you discuss that you are the doctor, you're talking, very intelligently about the medical illness and treatment plans, and you're still called the nurse at the end. So I think that those are big things. In negotiation, so when I started my job here in Boston, I actually negotiated for a few things. And I read a book, Women Don't Ask, about how women, we don't negotiate, or even that, lean in. We don't sit at the table often and apply for leadership positions because we feel like we need to check off each and every box when men don't do that. And so I myself have had to kind of take myself outside of it and say, okay, Brittne, you are qualified. And if you're not qualified, we're going to fake it till we make it. So go ahead.
Everybody else does.
Right. Exactly. So I think that those are some of the personal challenges, and also, just like environmental, being in medicine challenges, balancing work and life has been a challenge too, to be honest, where I don't know if Kevin would say, I'm sure he would say that he does have some difficulty balancing it all, but probably a little less than me.
And it's bigger than, not being considered a nurse. It's the fact that you've completed, 8 to 12 years of education, and that's, some people can only perceive females as nurses in the hospital setting. And that's something that we have to actively work together to change that perception. So no dig on nurses, but this is a story that needs to be told. It needs to be told again and again until it starts to change.
Yes. And thank you, Stephen, for saying that, because I love my nurses. You guys are my eyes and my ears. And so we work together, for patient care. But as you mentioned, it's always assumed that we're the nurses, that women can only be nurses, that women aren't, equally as qualified to be physicians.
Yeah. Talking about juggling a very busy schedule, I know you're involved in quite a few extracurricular activities. You have your Instagram account, Brittne Halford. That's BrittneHalford, Brittne Halford on Instagram. There you talk a lot about finances and give financial education, but you also are involved in a couple other side businesses and projects, one of which being the satin stretch wrap. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, and thank you for mentioning. So after residency, I had a little bit more space to do things that I've always loved to do. So growing up, I was a tinkerer. I was always putting things together, improvising. And I think mostly because I'm very frugal. So I'm like, okay, I'm not paying for this. I'm going to figure out another way to do this.
Yo también.
Sí, entonces, and then I was having some struggles with my hair. I have a lot of shrinkage, so I have natural hair and I have a lot of shrinkage. For those of you who don't know what shrinkage is that a textured hair can be so curly that when it gets wet and it dries, it shrinks up really tight. And so all those coils are just really tight. And for me, the problem is that it causes single-stranded knots, which cause breakage. So I was looking for a solution to that, but I didn't like going to the salon and having them blow dry my hair because the heat also caused damage. So what I developed after tinkering were the satin stretch wraps, which is a non-heat way to stretch your hair, and it minimizes shrinkage. But because I'm also frugal, I wanted to make sure that it didn't just do one thing. So it also can be used as a curling tool to curl your hair. So it's a multi-use tool that I've developed for natural hair. And that really just came out of just having the mental space, but also having some of the financial space to pursue something that I didn't know if it would work or not, but I thought that it was worth a try and worth an investment. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And they will be coming onto the market soon. We've had another hiccup in China getting them manufactured, but hopefully by the end of this year.
Incredible. I learned so much about shrinkage, and I actually have 5 sisters, but thank you for that. Additionally, you're involved in an Etsy shop. What is Bremelin and Rose?
Yes. So Bremelin Rose is a shop where we create, and I say we, it's really my aunt Rose, hair accessories for babies, girls, and women, and they're all satin lined. So my aunt Rose is kind of like, she's like my second mom. She's the one who has done all of these like creative activities with me, even as a young child. She would always color with me, and we would always do these craft projects, scrapbooking, refurbishing. So she had come here in Boston to watch Brooke. She and my mom, when Kevin and I took our vacation, and she brought her sewing machine. And I have my headbands that are satin lined. I sleep on a satin pillowcase, but she realized that my daughter, Brooke, didn't have any satin lined headbands. And so she pulled out her sewing machine. She said, you know what, we can create her some headbands and put the satin lining so we can protect her hair. The whole philosophy of satin, sleeping on satin, is that it does not absorb the moisture from textured hair. And we know that that's a problem. Moisture retention is a huge problem for textured hair. So, as I'm putting hats and caps and all of these headbands on her hair, she wanted to make sure that her hair was protected. So we started out small with an Etsy shop. And so far we've grown. It's been 2 months, and we have grossed about $3,000 in selling headbands. And so I am helping her to get started with her Shopify store. So that should be launching soon as well.
Awesome. I'm taking notes over here. So I need to get a satin pillowcase to help minimize my shrinkage and breakage and keep my hair moisturized.
There you go.
All right. To round out all these incredible things you do, your husband, Kevin, is also in the healthcare field. How has that been, being able to work together, additionally to raise your daughter, Brooke? So it's an incredibly busy household. How does that work?
Yeah, so we have a joint calendar. Every Sunday, we talk about our schedule for the week just to make sure. We've had a couple of communication snafus where we didn't have childcare or something wasn't on the calendar and it went amiss. So that's mainly how we're working together, is making sure that our communication is on key and also very transparent. For me, how I've managed work and life is, I realized that I'm not Superwoman. And so what that means is that, I have to ask for help to help me to, make sure that we have food on the table, and Kevin does some grocery shopping too and cooking too. Then I also ask myself, and this is some advice that my mentor gave me, is asking yourself what brings you joy. Mm-hmm. And so I ask myself what brings me joy, and I try to make sure that I do those things and only those things. And I use this question to evaluate opportunities that are presented to me at work. Like, is this going to bring me joy? And if no, then I go to say, okay, well, will it help me to meet a goal? And that goal could be becoming a better writer, for example. So if someone's like, hey, does anyone want to help with this review article? Well, it's not going to bring me joy to write, but my goal is to become a better writer. So yes, I will say yes to that. So I try to negotiate my time by using kind of those two questions. And then if there's something that only I can do, then of course I got to do it. But if there's something that someone else can do, then I try to designate that task. So our nanny helps us out a lot. At first, I was very fearful of asking her to cook a meal or, do some laundry. But a girl got to eat, but I don't have to eat like food that I cook only,
Right.
right? So somebody else can cook the food for me. And so that's what I've just tried to use those questions and like that thought process to evaluate opportunities and the tasks that need to be done so that I would have more space for me, more space for Brooke, more space for Kevin, and to make sure that I'm just doing the things that are going to bring me the most joy.
Awesome. And I think that group calendar is a great idea. I could definitely see how that is effective and how that really helps you guys maintain three incredibly busy schedules if you count Brooke, because I'm sure she's got a lot on her plate too. Is Brooke helping you make these satin head wraps?
She's not, but she likes to take them out and play with them.
Good. We make sure no child labor laws are being violated in the
I know, right?
the Halford household. Awesome. I definitely want to talk about this huge topic because you have a number of posts about this on your Instagram page. Finances. You've been able to pay off all your student loans. Talking with Kevin, your husband, you're just a financial wizard and you're using social media to spread all these messages and advice and tips. So the floor is yours. Whatever you want to tell our listeners about finances and how to better ourselves. And I'm taking notes myself.
Well, thank you. So where do we start? I guess, I think the first place is that we all need to become financially literate because it's not taught in school. And I am very grateful to my parents. So both of my parents were economic majors and both of them are extremely frugal. Like my dad is, extremely frugal. So, but they taught me how to manage money. And being from Flint, Michigan, although like I never struggled, I saw people struggling around me all the time. So I knew that I never wanted to be in that position. So during residency, I started to listen to Marketplace Money on NPR. So it's a program on NPR, Marketplace Money. And if you can go back really far, then they had a lot about personal finance. So I learned about compounding interest, which I had never thought of before. So compounding interest is basically the addition of interest to your principal. So whatever it is for your debt, if you're talking about debt. And then on top of that, they're going to charge you interest. So basically it's interest on your interest. And I hated that. Like you are making more money off of me every month because you're charging interest on my interest. I absolutely hate losing money. So compounding also works in a positive way, like if you have investments, right? So whatever you earn for that investment, then that's going to add to whatever your balance was before, and you'll earn more interest on that investment. So it works both ways. But I had no understanding of compounding interest before. I had no understanding about like my credit to debt utilization ratio. And basically that's like if you have $2,000 available in credit, right, on a credit card, but you go and you spend $1,000, then that credit to debt utilization ratio is going to be 50% because you've used $1,000 of your available $2,000. And when that happens, when you're using too much of your credit, then that can hurt your credit score. And so you want to keep that number to about 30% or less. I would say 0, but I know we're not all there yet.
Whoa. Okay. Let's not get carried away.
Right. But, so I just started to delve into learning more about personal finance. I read The White Coat Investor, and with my student loans, when I graduated from medical school, I didn't have any. I only had $10,000 from undergrad, and I paid that off during my summer job. So when I graduated from medical school, I had $131,000 in debt, and that started to grow, because it was interest during residency. And I just hated that I had this much debt, and every month I had to pay money to someone. And then they were earning interest on my interest. So every every year it was like more money. Like all of my payments weren't even touching my principal. So I really hated that. So during residency, I know a lot of like my co-residents, they deferred payments, or they put their loans in forbearance, and I didn't want to do any of that. So I started paying with like an income driven payment plan. And then as soon as I graduated from residency, I started to think about, okay, how can I refinance these loans? Because I had $131,000 debt at 6.5%, and that was too much. And there were cheaper or lower interest rates offerings.
And this was with you making payments in residency, correct?
So when I paid payments in residency, at the end of residency, I had $138,000. So even with making payments in residency, $7,000 in interest accrued.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, in residency, you're not making that much money. So the payments were like $200, $300. But anytime I had an extra $20, like even an extra $20, I would add that to it just to knock it off. So I was very frugal in residency. I lived in a cheap place. I made sure that it was a safe neighborhood. I shopped at Aldi's. I cooked my meals. Or used the free resident meals. So I lived very cheaply. The most that I spent money on was probably travel to go and see Kevin.
Okay.
So when I finished residency, I refinanced my loans with SoFi, but there are many different companies out there. And with refinancing my loans, basically what that is that you sell your loan, so it goes from federal to a private bank, and they give you a lower interest rate. So by doing that, I was able to decrease my interest rate to about 3.25%. And so that saves a lot of money in interest. So that allows more of that money that I'm applying to my student loans to go towards the principal. But what that also does is it increases your loan payments, because there's no income-driven repayment plan. Maybe some banks will offer it, but as an attending physician, this was the payment that I had. So my payments went from, they probably would have been about $1,200 as an attending to about $2,500 a month that I paid when I refinanced my loans. But it allowed me to be like super aggressive. So I made a budget, and I used this joy budgeting technique. So I made a budget based upon my joy budgeting technique, and I can talk about that in a little bit. And anything in addition to that I had saved over, then I just applied it to my student loans. So I was really aggressive at knocking down my student loans, and I was able to pay them off $138,000 in 3.5 years. That's while investing, because I wanted to invest in my 401k, because compounding, remember, works both ways. So, I didn't want to wait until I paid off all of my debt to start compounding, and plus my job matched. So I didn't want to miss that match. And Kevin and I were investing in, mutual funds and ETFs, and we also saved up for an emergency plan. And we also took a couple of trips, outside of the country. So with this joy budgeting method, basically, I just asked myself again, what brings me joy? And so one of those things that brought me joy, or brings me joy, is traveling and seeing new places. So I made that a priority. So traveling was a line item on my budget, and then there were a couple of other things that, brought me joy. So I would allow myself to have 3 line items for joy. And so that could be ice cream. I like to eat ice cream. Yeah. Get ice cream every week. That's a line item on my budget,
geez.
And I budget that first. It's a priority. That's my joy priority. So I made sure that I budgeted the stuff that brought me joy first, and then my financial goals second, and everything else, if it was like eating out, that doesn't bring me joy. So the eating out budget, or line item on my budget, was very low, minimal. And so if I had to take something away, I made sure that I took the money away from the areas that don't bring me joy, but usually people spend a lot of money on. And so that I could reallocate those funds to what brings me joy. And as I'm knocking down debt, as long as I have my ice cream, as long as I'm able to travel, it makes this other part that I'm being more restrictive in, these other categories, more sustainable. And so that's the method that I use to knock down my debt and to do it in a way that I'm still like really enjoying life. So we were able to travel to India. We were able to travel to Hawaii. Now I am married, so like a lot of my living expenses are shared. When we go to India, I'm sharing a hotel with someone who can also help me pay for it. So I do have that benefit. But yeah, so that's how I knocked down debt. And it sounds simple. I mean, I don't think that it wasn't painful. That's why we do the joy budgeting and the joy priorities. Like, I don't have to eat out all week as long as I can have my ice cream on Friday. I'm cool. But yeah.
And how does that joy budgeting system work with your spouse, with Kevin? How do you integrate each other's wants and needs?
Yeah, so we manage our finances a little bit differently. So I am the frugal person, and Kevin is more of a spender. Which, but I think it works out actually, because there are some things that I'm frugal on, and Stephen, it just does not make sense. Like, when I tell Kevin, I'm like, okay, so I'm going to share, and I don't know how much time we have, but I'm going to share.
Take your time.
So when we were getting married, Kevin contributed to the wedding, I contributed to the wedding. And I wanted to find these charger plates. I found these charger plates on Craigslist. I went to Chicago. Mind you, I was living in St. Louis, okay? And the wedding was in Michigan. So this made no sense. I went to Chicago to visit a friend. I met up with someone, got these charger plates. I didn't think about...
Wait, what are these?
Oh, charger plates?
So I'm real basic. You got it.
So when you go to the wedding, there are usually like a decorative plate that's holding your spot. And then when they come to pass out the meal, then they bring a plated meal and sit it right on that charger plate. Oh. So it's a more decorative plate that you use as a place setting at weddings.
I'm learning all kinds of things. Okay. So St. Louis, Chicago, and Michigan, and we're hunting for charger plates.
Yes, we're hunting for charger plates, but I didn't drive. I took the train, Stephen. So I didn't think about how heavy these plates would be. And so I go to Chicago to get these plates, and I can't fit the plates in my suitcase because they're so big and heavy. And then I have to pull them on the train. And I probably saved maybe in the grand scheme of things about $75. But it was not worth it because it did not make logical sense.
What did Kevin say?
Kevin was very supportive. He supports me a lot, actually. So when I ended up getting them on the train, and he picked me up from the train, and he, of course, is much stronger than I am. So they were even a little heavy for him, but he wasn't struggling like me. And he just shook his head. The suitcase was broken. It was a disaster. And so there are times like that where the frugality just does not make logical sense. When you think about your time and your effort and the cost savings, it doesn't equate. So I'm happy to have, someone who spends money and can provide an alternative perspective. But going to how we split up our finances, sorry, that was a tangent.
That was well worth it.
It was so heavy. I wish you could see me trying to pull these things to the train station. So we separate our finances a little bit differently, or I don't know how other people do it, but we sit down and at each year, the beginning of the year, we write down our financial goals. So, we might say, okay, we want to have another baby this year. We want to take a trip, like we went to Mexico. So we want to take a big trip this year. And, we want to pay for Brooke's schooling. So whatever our big expenses are, then we budget those things out. And then we budget out our financial goals. Okay, we want to save for a house in 5 years, and we budget those things out. And so when we have a joint account, that is a joint savings account, that is an online savings account. So we use Discover, and that's because the brick and mortar banks you don't earn any interest. So for Discover, it's like 1.5% annual percentage yield. So we earn money on our money. So we keep the bulk of our money there in an online savings account, and we budget for all of our financial goals, for all of, our expenses, big expenses that are joint expenses. So we do that kind of at the beginning of the year. And then we look at our cash flow, which includes like our rent, gas, things of that nature. And we budget out those as well. And so we have our, savings account online. Then we have our checkings account that is in a brick and mortar bank that handles our day-to-day, month-to-month expenses. And then whatever is left over from what he contributes to our day-to-day, from what he contributes to our savings and our financial goals. And for me, the same thing. Whatever is left over, he has his money and I have my money. And so we can do whatever we want with that money without questions asked. So I spend a lot of my money on entrepreneurial things like the stretch wraps and Bremelin Rose, and he spends his money on other things that he enjoys. And so that allows us to have some financial freedom, that we don't have to go to our spouse each day to say, hey, I want to buy, a $500 bag. No, you work hard. So if you want that $500 bag, then you buy it. So that's kind of how we break up our finances, but we make sure that all the common expenses are paid for, that we have our financial goals budgeted, based upon our joy priorities. And what brings me joy and what brings him joy can be different, but then, we both like to spend time and travel. So that's part of a big joy priority. And then we get to budget our leftover money, our personal money, however we choose.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing about your life, sharing about the different experiences you've had as a female physician, and especially the last several minutes on finances. I know I learned a lot. I know our listeners will learn a lot. Disclaimer, the Black Doctors Podcast is not sponsored by any of the entities mentioned. If SoFi wants to chip in, holla at your boy. Dr. Halford, as we wrap up, would you let our listeners know how they can get in touch with you and how they can follow on with your different endeavors?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram mostly, and that is Brittne Halford. That's my handle in Instagram. Additionally, I have created for you guys, I talked about the joy budgeting, so I've created a freebie for you guys because, I realize that many people don't have this financial literacy, or they don't even know where to start. And so that can be a challenge. So I created my joy budgeting method just for you guys, and you can find it free. And I found a free hosting place, and that is at payhip, so payhip.com. And that's the / the joy budgeting method. And there it will take you to where you'll see the icon and you click to purchase for $10.99. But I'm going to give you guys a coupon code of Black Doc, BLACKDOC. Black Doc, you enter that and it's free. And so it's just a digital download of my joy budgeting method.
What? We got freebies? Okay. All right. Dr. Halford, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for all you're doing. There you have it. Black Doc for the coupon code. Be sure to go download this and check her out on Instagram. Brittne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of the Black Doctors Podcast. If you like what you heard, please share, leave a message or a comment as well. Tune in next week to hear more of our stories told by us on the Black Doctors Podcast.